The sun had barely kissed the horizon when President Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of his residence that fateful Tuesday morning. The air in Ouagadougou carried the familiar scent of burning charcoal and morning prayers drifting from nearby mosques. It was September 15th, a date that would forever be etched in the nation's memory, not for celebration, but for the moment when shadows revealed themselves in broad daylight. Traoré had always been an early riser, a habit inherited from his father, Colonel Amadou Traoré, who had served the nation with quiet dignity until his death 5 years prior. A leader who sleeps while his people wake is already defeated, his father had often said during their dawn walks through the family compound in Rayo, his childhood village. Now, as president of Burkina Faso, those words carried prophetic weight. Dressed in his customary gray suit, a deliberate choice to distance himself from the ostentatious displays of power favored by previous administrations, Traoré adjusted his modest black cap and descended the stairs of the presidential residence. His wife Aminata had kissed him goodbye at the doorway, as she did every morning, whispering a prayer for his safe return. "Be careful today, Ibrahim," she had said, her eyes holding a worry she couldn't quite articulate. "Something feels different." He had dismissed her concern with a gentle smile, but as his motorcade wound through the awakening streets of the capital, her words echoed in his mind. The intelligence briefings from the past weeks had been unusually sparse, a detail that should have raised more red flags than it did. Captain Soro, his head of security, sat rigidly in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, his weathered face scanning every shadow, every rooftop, every pedestrian. A veteran of 3 coups and countless political upheavals, Soro possessed an instinct for danger that had kept him alive through decades of service. This morning, that instinct was screaming. "Radio check," Soro spoke into his comm device. "All units report status. Unit 2, all clear. Unit 3, perimeter secure. Sniper team, elevated positions monitored, no threats detected." The responses came back crisp and professional, yet something felt off. Soro couldn't shake the feeling that they were driving into a trap, but the morning briefing had shown no credible threats, no chatter from informants, no unusual movement from known dissidents, nothing to suggest this day would be different from any other. As the motorcade approached the Ministry of State building, a colonial-era structure that housed several key government offices, Traoré reviewed his schedule one final time. A budget meeting with the finance minister at 9 a.m., followed by a session with regional governors at 10:30. By noon, he would address a gathering of civil society leaders about his administration's anti-corruption initiatives. It was this last item that had generated the most controversy in recent months. Traoré's relentless pursuit of transparency had ruffled feathers across the political spectrum. Bank accounts had been frozen, contracts scrutinized, and several high-ranking officials had been quietly asked to explain discrepancies in their financial declarations. Some had called him naive. Others had whispered that he was moving too fast, making too many enemies too quickly. "Mr. President," Captain Soro's voice cut through his thoughts, "we're approaching the drop-off point." The ministry building loomed. Ahead, its white walls reflecting the early morning sun like a beacon. Small clusters of citizens had gathered along the sidewalks, some hoping for a glimpse of their president, others simply going about their daily business. Children in school uniforms hurried past, their laughter mixing with the sounds of motor. Scooters and street vendors calling out their wares. This was the Burkina Faso that Traoré loved, vibrant, resilient, hopeful despite its struggles. These were the people he had sworn to serve, the faces that appeared in his dreams when the weight of office threatened to crush his spirit. The motorcade pulled up to the ministry entrance with practiced precision. Security agents emerged from the trailing vehicles, their eyes scanning, hands ready. Soro stepped out first, surveying the scene one final time before nodding to his men. "Clear to proceed, Mr. President." Traoré opened the car door himself. another small gesture that endeared him to the masses but frustrated his security detail. As his right foot touched the pavement, he paused for a moment, looking up at the building where his grandfather had once worked as a clerk during the colonial period. "From clerk to president in 3 generations," he murmured, a habit of speaking his thoughts aloud when moments felt particularly significant. That's when the morning calm shattered like glass. Crack! The first shot rang out from somewhere high and to the left, the bullet striking the armored car door just inches from where Traoré's head had been moments before. For a heartbeat, the world seemed suspended. The president half-crouched by the car door, his hand still gripping the handle, his mind struggling to process what had just occurred. Crack! 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 More shots followed in rapid succession, their echoes bouncing off the ministry walls like angry thunder. Screams erupted from the gathered crowd as people dove for cover behind vehicles, market stalls, and anything solid enough to stop a bullet. "Down! Get down!" Captain Sorrow's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, his body already moving to shield his president. But Traoré wasn't looking for cover. His head was turning, eyes searching for the source of the gunfire with the calculating calm of a man who had faced death before. During his military service in the early 2000s, Second Lieutenant Traoré had survived an ambush near the border with Mali that had claimed 6 of his men. The memory of that day, the way time seemed to slow, the way his training had kicked in even as terror clawed at his chest, flooded back now. "Rooftop, 11 o'clock!" he called out, pointing toward a building across the street where a muzzle flash had briefly appeared. Even in crisis, his mind was working, analyzing, leading. Captain Sorrow followed his president's gaze and immediately barked orders into his radio. "Sniper team, target acquired, building directly across from ministry entrance, 3rd floor, eastern window." But the shooting had already stopped. The silence that followed was almost more unsettling than the gunfire itself. In the distance, sirens began to wail as emergency services responded to the reports flooding the city's communication centers. Local residents emerged cautiously from their hiding spots, some injured from diving to the pavement, others simply shaken by what they had witnessed. Traoré slowly straightened, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. A thin line of blood trickled from a small cut on his cheek where a fragment of concrete had grazed him, but otherwise he appeared unharmed. "Sir, we need to get you out of here immediately," Sorrow urged, already moving to guide his president back toward the armored vehicle. "No." The word came out firm, definitive. Traoré's eyes were still scanning the area, but now they focused on the civilians who had been caught in the crossfire. A young mother clutched her toddler, both of them trembling behind an overturned fruit cart. An elderly man sat on the sidewalk, holding his bloodied knee where he had fallen while seeking cover. "These people need medical attention," Traoré said, starting to move toward the injured civilians. "Mr. President, with respect, that's not your... It's exactly my responsibility." Traoré's voice carried the authority of command, but also something deeper, a moral conviction that would not be swayed by protocol or security concerns. "These people were injured because someone wanted to kill me. The least I can do is ensure they receive care." For the next 20 minutes, President Ibrahim Traoré moved among his people like a shepherd tending his flock. He knelt beside the injured, spoke calmly to frightened children, and personally called for additional ambulances on his secure phone. News cameras arrived quickly, but instead of the typical political photo opportunity, they captured something rarer, a leader who seemed genuinely more concerned about his people's welfare than his own image. By the time his security detail finally convinced him to leave the scene, word of the assassination attempt was already spreading across social media and through the informal networks that carried news faster than any official channels in Burkina Faso. As the motorcade sped back toward the presidential palace, Traoré sat in contemplative silence, his mind already working through the implications of what had just occurred. This hadn't been a random act of violence or a crude attempt by political amateurs. The precision of the timing, the choice of location, the fact that the shooters had vanished so quickly, it all pointed to something far more sophisticated and far more dangerous. Someone with intimate knowledge of his schedule and security protocols had tried to kill him, which meant the enemy wasn't just at the gates, it was already inside. The presidential palace had been transformed into a fortress by the time Traoré's motorcade arrived. Additional security personnel patrolled the grounds, while technicians swept every room for listening devices and potential threats. The atmosphere was tense, electric, with the kind of focused energy that follows a near catastrophe. Dr. Fatou Ouagadougou, the president's personal physician, was waiting in the medical suite to examine him despite his protests that he was fine. A small, determined woman in her 50s who had known Traoré since his days as a young military officer, she was one of the few people who could speak to him without the formal deference that his position usually commanded. "Sit still and let me work," she ordered, cleaning the cut on his cheek with professional efficiency. "You may be bulletproof in your mind, Ibrahim, but your body is still made of flesh and blood." As she worked, Traoré's thoughts were elsewhere. The faces of the conspirators were still hidden, but their methods were becoming clear. This hadn't been an attempt by external enemies or foreign agitators. The level of coordination required, the intimate knowledge of his movements, it could only come from within his own administration. "Doctor," he said quietly, "in your professional opinion, how long does it take for a cancer to spread through a body before the symptoms become visible?" Dr. Ouagadougou paused in her work, meeting his eyes in the mirror. She had known him long, enough to recognize when his medical questions were actually political metaphors. "That depends on the type of cancer, Ibrahim. Some are aggressive and show symptoms quickly. Others can grow silently for years before they're detected. By then, they've often metastasized throughout the entire system. And the treatment? The aggressive approach is often necessary, surgical removal of all affected tissue, followed by intensive treatment to ensure nothing remains. It's traumatic for the patient, but sometimes it's the only way to save the life." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Minister of Defense Colonel Yakuba Kone entered, his usually immaculate uniform slightly wrinkled from the emergency response. Behind him came Colonel Abubakar Dio, head of military intelligence, carrying a thick folder that undoubtedly contained preliminary findings about the assassination attempt. "Mr. President," Colonel Kone began formally, "we've secured the immediate area and begun our investigation. Colonel Dio has some initial findings." Traoré waved Dr. Ouagadougou away gently and turned to face his security advisors. "Tell me what you know." Colonel Dio opened his folder and spread several photographs across the table. "The shooters used the Sankharé building across from the ministry. We found evidence of their position on the 3rd floor, spent cartridges, a bipod mount, and some interesting equipment." He handed Traoré a photograph showing military-grade communication devices and what appeared to be professionally printed floor plans of the ministry building. "These aren't the tools of amateur assassins," Dio continued. "The communication equipment is encrypted, military standard. The floor plans include security camera positions and guard rotations that are only available to people with high-level clearance." Minister Kone leaned forward, his expression grave. "Mr. President, we have to consider the possibility that this operation had inside assistance." The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Traoré had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed by his intelligence chief made it real in a way that set his jaw tight with determination. "How many people had access to my schedule for today?" he asked. "Complete access? Perhaps 20 people. Partial access, timing, routes, general movements, could be as many as 50, Colonel Dio replied. "I want a list of all 50 names. Full. Background checks, financial records, communications analysis, everything." Traoré's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. "And I want it done quietly. If we have traitors in our midst, they cannot know that we suspect them. Over the next several hours, the presidential palace became a nerve center of investigation. Intelligence analysts worked alongside cybersecurity experts, financial investigators collaborated with communications specialists, and slowly, patterns began to emerge from the chaos. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Aminata Traoré, the president's wife, had been reviewing the condolence messages and expressions of concern that had begun pouring in from government officials. As someone who had spent years navigating the social complexities of Burkina Faso's political elite, she possessed an intuitive understanding of the subtle signals that others might miss. "Ibrahim," she said, entering his private study where he was reviewing intelligence reports, "you need to see this." She handed him two messages that had arrived within minutes of each other. The first was from Minister of Interior Affairs Seydou Traoré. "Thank God you are safe, Mr. President. This cowardly attack on our democracy will not go unpunished. We stand with you in this difficult time." The second was from Minister of Economic Development Moussa Ouagadougou. "Praise be to Allah for your protection today. Such violence has no place in our peaceful nation. We must all remain vigilant against those who would destabilize our progress." Traoré read both messages twice, then looked up at his wife. "What am I missing?" "The timing," Aminata replied. Kabore's message arrived at 11:47 a.m., Ouagadougou's at 11:49 a.m. But Ibrahim, the news of the attack wasn't made public until 12:15 p.m. How did they know to send condolences before anyone officially knew what had happened? The president felt a chill run down his spine. In the chaos following the assassination attempt, public information had been tightly controlled. Only his immediate security detail, the medical team, and a handful of senior advisors knew the full extent of what had occurred. He immediately called for Colonel Dio, who arrived within minutes carrying additional intelligence reports. "Colonel, I need you to verify something for me," Traoré said, handing him the two messages. "Check the exact timing of when information about this morning's events was released to different levels of government officials." Dio scanned the messages, his trained eye immediately catching what Aminata had noticed. "These were sent before any official notifications went out. I'll have my team trace the communication logs immediately. And Colonel, add both Traoré and Ouagadougou to your priority investigation list." As evening fell over Ouagadougou, President Traoré found himself alone in his study, surrounded by files that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of betrayal from within his own government. The investigation had expanded rapidly, revealing a web of suspicious communications, unusual financial transactions, and coordination between officials who supposedly barely knew each other. The phone on his desk rang. It was his mother, calling from the family compound in Rayo. "My son." Her familiar voice carried the warmth and concern that had sustained him through every challenge of his life. "I heard what happened today. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, Mama. Just a small cut. Your body may be fine. But what about your heart? I can hear the heaviness in your voice." Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, commander of the armed forces, leader of 15 million people, felt his composure waver at his mother's gentle words. In that moment, he was just a son who needed his mother's wisdom. "Some of the people I trusted most have betrayed me, Mama. People I considered friends, colleagues I've worked with for years. How do you continue to lead when you can't trust anyone around you?" His mother was quiet for a long moment, and he could picture her sitting on the wooden bench outside their family home, looking up at the stars that had guided generations of their ancestors. "Do you remember what your grandfather used to say about the baobab tree?" she finally asked. "That it grows strongest in the harshest conditions." "Yes, but do you remember the rest? The baobab doesn't grow strong by avoiding storms. It grows strong by surviving them. Every scar on its bark tells a story of endurance. Every deep root speaks of its refusal to be uprooted." But Mama, what if the storms come from within? What if the very soil you're rooted in is poisoned? Then you clean the soil, my son. You remove the poison, plant new seeds, and trust that good things can still grow. But you never stop being a tree that others can shelter under. After hanging up, Traoré sat in contemplation for a long time. Outside his window, the lights of Ouagadougou twinkled like earthbound stars, each one representing a family, a dream, a hope placed in his leadership. The weight of their trust felt heavier now, knowing that some of those closest to him had been willing to spill blood to remove him from power. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Colonel Dio entered, his expression grave but determined. "Mr. President, we've made significant progress. The communication analysis has revealed a pattern of encrypted messages between several high-ranking officials in the weeks leading up to today's attack. We've also discovered some concerning financial irregularities." He spread a new set of documents across the president's desk. Bank statements, wire transfer records, and communication logs that painted a picture of conspiracy that was larger and more coordinated than they had initially suspected. "How many?" Traoré asked quietly. "So far, we have evidence implicating at least 12 officials across multiple ministries. But, Mr. President, this appears to be just one cell of a larger network. The money trail leads to accounts in several countries, and the communication patterns suggest coordination with external actors." Traoré studied the documents in silence, his mind processing the implications. This wasn't just a simple coup attempt or political rivalry. This was a systematic effort to destabilize his administration, possibly his entire country. "Colonel, I want you to prepare a complete briefing for tomorrow morning. Include every detail, every connection, every piece of evidence. And I want you to invite only our most trusted advisors, people whose loyalty is beyond question." "Sir, given the scope of this conspiracy, that may be a very small group." "Then so be it. Better to work with 5 loyal people than 50 potential traitors." As Colonel Dio gathered his files and prepared to leave, Traoré called out to him, "Colonel, thank you for your service today. Your quick thinking and dedication may have saved not just my life, but the future of this country." "It's my honor to serve, Mr. President. And, sir, for what it's worth, I believe the people who tried to kill you today have made a critical error." "How so?" "They've underestimated the strength of the man they're trying to destroy. And they've certainly underestimated the strength of the people who stand behind you." After Dio left, Traoré returned to his window, looking out over the city he had sworn to serve and protect. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, difficult decisions, and probably more betrayals. But tonight, he felt something he hadn't expected in the wake of an assassination attempt: hope. The conspiracy against him had revealed itself too early. The plotters had shown their hand before they were ready to finish the game. And while the knowledge of their betrayal cut deep, it also provided him with something invaluable: the truth. And with truth he could build something lasting. Dawn broke gray and somber over Ouagadougou, as if the sky itself reflected the gravity of what was about to unfold. President Traoré had barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing intelligence, reports, and preparing for what would become the most crucial day of his presidency. At precisely 7 a.m., he convened an emergency meeting in the most secure conference room of the presidential palace. The attendees were carefully chosen, only those whose loyalty had been verified beyond any doubt through years of service and personal sacrifice. The group was smaller than any major policy meeting in recent memory, but the quality of their character was unquestionable. Present were Colonel Dio, whose intelligence work had already proven invaluable, Dr. Ouagadougou, whose medical background provided her with an analytical mind perfect for examining the symptoms of governmental corruption, Captain Soro, whose street-level knowledge of security threats was matched only by his unwavering dedication, Minister of Education Rasmane, Ouagadougou, no relation to the doctor, a former village teacher whose integrity had never been questioned. And finally, General Marie-Claire Caboret, the only female general in the armed forces and someone whose rise through the ranks had been earned through merit rather than politics. "Ladies and gentlemen," Traoré began, standing at the head of the conference table, "what I'm about to share with you must not leave this room until we decide together how to proceed. We are facing a threat to this nation that goes far beyond yesterday's assassination attempt." He nodded to Colonel Dio, who activated a large screen and began presenting the evidence they had gathered over the past 18 hours. The first image showed a complex web of connections, names linked by lines representing communications, financial, transfers, and meeting records. At the center of the web were 12 names, including Minister Caboret and Minister Ouagadougou, whose premature condolence messages had first raised suspicion. "This conspiracy has been developing for at least 6 months, Colonel Dio explained. "The financial records show payments totaling over 2 million CFA francs distributed among the conspirators, with the funds originating from accounts traced to 3 different countries." General Caboret leaned forward, studying the chart intently. "This level of organization and funding suggests state-level support. Which countries are we looking at? We're still working to confirm the ultimate sources, but preliminary analysis points to actors who have been critical of our anti-corruption initiatives and our efforts to reduce foreign exploitation of our natural resources." Dr. Ouagadougou spoke next, her voice steady but concerned. "Ibrahim, if this network is as extensive as it appears, we have to assume they have contingency plans. Yesterday's attempt failed, but they won't simply abandon their objectives." "Which brings us to the critical question," Traoré said, resuming control of the meeting. "How do we respond? We can arrest the known conspirators immediately, but that might simply drive the rest of the network deeper underground. Or we can continue gathering intelligence while they remain unaware that we've discovered them." Minister Ouagadougou, the former teacher, raised his hand slightly. "Mr. President, there's a third option that might be worth considering." "Go on." "Rasmané. We could use this knowledge strategically, feed false information through the suspected channels and see where it leads us. If we're careful, we might be able to map the entire network before taking action." Captain Soro nodded approvingly. "A counterintelligence operation. It's risky, but it could give us the complete picture we need." The discussion continued for nearly 3 hours, with each participant contributing their expertise to develop what would become known as Operation Sunrise, a comprehensive plan to expose and dismantle the conspiracy while protecting the integrity of the government and the safety of loyal officials. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. They would create false intelligence suggesting that the president was planning to make several controversial appointments and policy changes. This information would be strategically leaked through different suspected conspirators, with each person receiving slightly different details. By tracking how this information spread and where it ultimately ended up, they could map the communication, networks, and identify additional conspirators. Meanwhile, financial investigators would quietly begin tracing the money trails, working with international partners to identify the foreign accounts and their ultimate controllers. And most importantly, they would begin the delicate process of building legal cases against the conspirators that would stand up in court. "This operation will require absolute discretion," Traoré emphasized as the meeting concluded. "We cannot afford to have our plans discovered before we're ready to act. Each of you will be responsible for a specific aspect of the investigation, and we will meet daily to coordinate our efforts." As the others filed out, General Caboret remained behind. "Ibrahim," she said, using his first name in a way that indicated she was speaking as an old friend rather than a subordinate, "are you prepared for what we might discover? If this conspiracy runs as deep as the evidence suggests, the revelations could shake public confidence in the entire government." Traoré was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "Marie-Claire, yesterday someone tried to kill me on the streets of our capital. Today we've discovered that some of the people I trusted most have been working to destroy everything we've tried to build. Public confidence is already shaken. We just haven't told people why yet. But when we do tell them, when we reveal the extent of this betrayal, how do we maintain stability? By showing them that their government is strong enough to heal itself, by proving that truth and justice are more powerful than corruption and conspiracy. He walked to the window, looking out over the city. Our people deserve leaders who are worthy of their trust. If that means exposing painful truths and making difficult changes, then that's what we'll do. Over the following days, Operation Sunrise began to yield results that exceeded even their most optimistic projections. The false information spread through the conspiracy network like ink through water, revealing connections that the investigators had never suspected. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Minister Ouagadougou, one of the suspected conspirators, made a critical error in his eagerness to share the false intelligence he had received. He passed the information to someone who immediately reported it to the president's security team, revealing not just his own guilt, but also providing a direct link to a foreign embassy that had been coordinating with the conspirators. Mr. President, Colonel Dio reported during their daily briefing, we now have confirmation that this conspiracy extends beyond our borders. The coordination meetings were taking place at the embassy of a country that has been critical of our resource nationalization policies. The evidence was overwhelming. Communications intercepts showed embassy officials coordinating with the conspirators. Financial records revealed payments flowing from accounts controlled by foreign intelligence services, and surveillance footage captured several of the suspected traitors entering and leaving the embassy through service entrances. But perhaps most damaging of all, they had discovered the full extent of the assassination plot. It hadn't been a simple attempt to kill the president. It had been designed as the opening move in a broader campaign to destabilize the government and create an excuse for international intervention to restore order. They weren't just trying to kill me, Traoré realized during one late-night briefing. They were trying to create a crisis that would justify outside interference in our sovereignty. The weight of this revelation settled heavily on everyone in the room. They weren't just dealing with domestic political rivalry. They were confronting a sophisticated attempt at foreign-sponsored regime change. What's our next move? General Kabore asked. Traoré was quiet for a long moment, his mind working through the implications and possibilities. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a determination that had been forged by betrayal and tempered by truth. We end this. Tomorrow morning, we begin the arrests. But we don't just arrest the conspirators. We expose the entire network to our people and to the world. We show everyone exactly what we've been fighting against and why our struggle for transparency and sovereignty matters. That's a significant risk, Mr. President, Captain Sorrow cautioned. Once we go public with this information, there's no controlling the narrative. Good, Traoré replied. I'm tired of controlled narratives. Our people deserve the truth, and our enemies need to understand that their shadows cannot survive in the light. The next morning, as the first arrests began, President Ibrahim Traoré prepared to address his nation and the world. The speech he was about to give would not only expose the conspiracy against his government, it would mark the beginning of a new chapter in Burkina Faso's history, one built on the foundation of truth rather than the shifting sands of political convenience. Standing before his mirror, adjusting his tie, he thought of his father's words. A man's character is revealed not in times of comfort, but in moments of crisis. The crisis had come. Now it was time to show the world what kind of man and what kind of nation would emerge from it. The National Assembly Hall had never felt more charged with anticipation. Every seat was filled, with journalists from across Africa and beyond occupying the press gallery, their cameras focused on the podium where President Ibrahim Traoré would soon deliver what many were already calling the most important speech of his presidency. Outside the building, Thousands of citizens had gathered, many holding signs that read, "Truth before power" and "Justice for Burkina Faso." The assassination attempt had shocked the nation, but the rumors that had been circulating about a broader conspiracy had left people hungry for answers. At precisely 10:10 a.m., President Traoré entered the chamber. His appearance was met with a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes, but his expression remained somber, reflecting the gravity of what he was about to reveal. As the applause died down, he stood behind the podium, his hands resting lightly on the sides as he looked out over the assembled crowd. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, clear, and unwavering. "My fellow citizens of Burkina Faso, friends and observers from around the world, I come before you today not to celebrate, but to confront a truth that is both painful and necessary." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the chamber. 3 days ago, as I went about my duties serving our nation, assassins opened fire on the streets of our capital. Their bullets missed their target, but their message was clear. There are those who believe that violence should determine the course of our democracy. The chamber was absolutely silent, every person hanging on his words. Today, I can reveal to you the full scope of what we have discovered through our investigation. The attack on my life was not the work of isolated extremists or foreign agents acting alone. It was the culmination of a months-long conspiracy involving 12 officials within our own government, coordinated and funded by foreign actors who sought to overthrow our democratically elected administration. A gasp went through the chamber. While many had suspected government involvement, hearing it confirmed with such certainty was still shocking. Traoré continued, his voice never wavering. "The evidence is overwhelming and will be made available to the public in its entirety. Communications intercepts, financial records, surveillance footage, all of it will be released so that every citizen can see exactly what we have been fighting against." He activated a large screen behind him, which displayed the same web diagram that Colonel Dio had shown in their secret briefing. But now, the names were no longer redacted. Minister of Interior Affairs, Seydou Kabore. Minister of Economic Development, Moussa Ouagadougou. Deputy Minister of Defense, Jacques Ouagadougou. And 9 other officials whose names you see here. All of them participated in a conspiracy to assassinate your president and destabilize your democracy. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs, but Traoré raised his hand for silence. But the betrayal goes deeper than domestic politics. These conspirators were in regular communication with foreign intelligence operatives, receiving funding and coordination support from a country that saw our anti-corruption efforts and resource nationalization policies as threats to their interests. The screen changed to show financial records documenting payments from foreign accounts to the conspirators. Over 2 million CFA francs were distributed among the conspirators in the months leading up to the assassination attempt. The ultimate source of this funding has been traced to accounts controlled by intelligence services of a nation that shall remain unnamed until legal proceedings are complete, but whose identity will surprise no one who has followed their reaction to our sovereignty initiatives. President Traoré stepped away from the podium, moving closer to the assembled legislators and citizens. "I stand before you today not as a victim, but as a witness to something remarkable. In the face of betrayal, we have discovered the true strength of our institutions, our security services, our intelligence agencies, our loyal civil servants. They responded to this crisis with professionalism, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to the truth." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "But more importantly, we have discovered the strength of our people. In the hours following the assassination attempt, as rumors and fear spread through our streets, our citizens did not retreat into fear or division. Instead, they came together demanding answers, insisting on justice, and showing the world what a mature democracy looks like when it is tested. The applause this time was sustained and heartfelt, with many in the audience wiping away tears. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter in our nation's history. We will not allow this betrayal to weaken us. We will use it to make us stronger. Every institution of our government will be subjected to unprecedented scrutiny. Every official, including myself, will be held to the highest standards of transparency and accountability. The screen behind him changed again, this time showing a comprehensive reform package that his administration had developed in the wake of the conspiracy's discovery. Effective immediately, we are implementing the most aggressive anti-corruption measures in our nation's history. All government communications will be subject to regular audit. All financial transactions will be tracked and publicly reported. All officials will undergo enhanced background investigations and regular loyalty assessments. He paused, his expression growing more serious. I will not lie to you. These measures will be disruptive. They will slow down some government processes. They will make some people uncomfortable, but they are necessary if we want to rebuild the trust that has been broken. Furthermore, we are establishing a new National Integrity Commission, composed entirely of civil society representatives chosen by the people themselves. This commission will have the power to investigate any government official, including the president, and to recommend disciplinary action or criminal prosecution. The reforms were sweeping, going far beyond what most observers had expected. But Traoré wasn't finished. We are also launching a national dialogue on sovereignty and self-determination. For too long, we have allowed foreign interests to influence our domestic policies through corruption and conspiracy. This ends today. The chamber erupted in applause, but Traoré held up his hand once more. However, let me be absolutely clear about what this means. We are not turning our backs on the international community. We welcome partnerships built on mutual respect and shared benefit. What we reject is any attempt to subvert our democracy through conspiracy, corruption, or violence. His voice dropped to a more personal tone. To those who participated in this conspiracy, I say this: you have betrayed not just your president, but your people, your constitution, and your own principles. You will face justice through our courts, and history will judge you harshly. But I also say this: our democracy is strong enough to survive your betrayal, and our people are compassionate enough to forgive once justice has been served. 2. The foreign actors who funded and coordinated this conspiracy. You have underestimated the strength of our democracy and the resolve of our people. Your shadows cannot survive in the light of truth, and your interference will no longer be tolerated. And to my fellow citizens, thank you for your patience, your strength, and your unwavering commitment to the values that make us who we are. You have shown the world what it means to be Burkinabe. The standing ovation that followed lasted over 10 minutes, with people throughout the chamber wiping away tears and embracing each other. But perhaps more significantly, the crowds outside could be heard chanting, Vérité, justice, Burkina Faso. Truth, justice, Burkina Faso. As President Traoré left the podium, he knew that his words had set in motion a transformation that would reshape his country for generations to come. In the days following President Traoré's historic address, Burkina Faso underwent what historians would later call the Great Reckoning. The arrests of the 12 conspirators sent shockwaves through the political establishment, but the public response was overwhelmingly supportive of the president's decisive action. The first to be arrested was Minister Seydou Kaboré, whose premature condolence message had been the thread that unraveled the entire conspiracy. Security forces found him in his office at dawn, calmly packing documents into a briefcase as if he had been expecting their arrival. Minister Kaboré, Colonel Dio announced as he entered the office with a team of agents, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, treason, and corruption of public office. Kaboré looked up from his packing, a sardonic smile playing on his lips. Colonel, You realize that arresting half the government will create more chaos than any conspiracy could? Former Minister Caboret, Dio corrected, we're not arresting half the government. We're removing a cancer that was slowly killing our democracy. As Caboret was led away in handcuffs, crowds of civil servants and citizens gathered outside the ministry building. But instead of the protests that some had feared, the crowds were celebratory, with people singing traditional songs of renewal and cleansing. Similar scenes played out across Ouagadougou as each of the conspirators was arrested. Some went quietly, like Minister Ouagadougou, who wept as he confessed his crimes to the arresting officers. Others, like Deputy Minister Ouagadougou, attempted to flee to the embassy of the foreign country that had funded the conspiracy, only to be turned away at the gates. By the end of the week, all 12 conspirators were in custody, and the investigation had expanded to include dozens of lower-level officials who had been complicit in the plot. But President Traoré was careful to ensure that the arrests didn't paralyze the government. For each position vacated by a conspirator, he appointed an acting replacement from among the pool of loyal civil servants, many of whom were younger professionals who had been overlooked by the previous system of patronage and corruption. The most dramatic moment came when the evidence linking the conspiracy to foreign intelligence services was made public. Colonel Dio held a press conference where he presented intercepted communications, financial records, and even photographs of conspirators meeting with foreign agents. This was not a domestic political dispute, Dio explained to the packed room of journalists. This was a sophisticated attempt at regime change, funded and coordinated by a foreign power that saw our president's anti-corruption efforts as a threat to their economic interests in our region. The revelation sent diplomatic shockwaves across West Africa and beyond. Several countries recalled their ambassadors from Ouagadougou for consultations, while others publicly condemned any foreign interference in Burkina Faso's internal affairs. But perhaps the most significant response came from the people of Burkina Faso themselves. In villages across the country, chiefs and elders called special assemblies to discuss the revelations and their implications. In cities, civil society organizations organized forums where citizens could voice their concerns and suggestions for reform. One such forum, held in the courtyard of a school in Bobo Dioulasso, drew over 1,000 people on a sweltering Thursday evening. The discussion was led by Salamata Ouattara, a respected teacher and community organizer who had known President Traoré since his youth. What we have learned, she told the crowd, is that the enemies of our progress were not just faceless foreigners or distant politicians. They were people we knew, people we trusted, people who sat at our tables and shared our hopes for the future. An elderly farmer raised his hand to speak. Sister Salamata, how do we know that the new people in government will be any different? How do we prevent this from happening again? The question sparked a passionate discussion that lasted well into the night. Citizens proposed everything from mandatory public disclosure of all government officials' financial records to citizen oversight committees for each ministry. The enthusiasm and engagement were remarkable, with people who had never before participated in political discussions offering thoughtful suggestions for reform. Similar scenes were playing out across the country, and President Traoré took notice. Rather than simply implementing top-down reforms, he decided to harness this grassroots energy by creating a national constitutional convention that would allow citizens to directly participate in reshaping their government. We have been given a rare opportunity, he announced during a radio address that reached even the most remote villages. The betrayal we have uncovered has forced us to examine every aspect of how our government operates. Instead of simply patching the holes, we have the chance to build something entirely new, something that truly serves the people rather than the other way around. The Constitutional Convention would bring together representatives from every region, every ethnic group, every profession, and every age demographic to spend 6 months crafting a new framework for governance. It was an ambitious undertaking that drew both praise and skepticism from international observers. Traoré is either a visionary or a fool, commented Dr. Kwame Asante, a political scientist at the University of Ghana who had been following the crisis closely. Constitutional conventions can produce remarkable documents of governance, but they can also unleash forces that are difficult to control. President Traoré was well aware of the risks, but he had concluded that the status quo was no longer sustainable. The conspiracy had revealed fundamental weaknesses in Burkina Faso's governmental system, weaknesses that cosmetic reforms couldn't address. The convention process began with regional assemblies where citizens would select their representatives and develop initial proposals for consideration. These assemblies were unlike anything Burkina Faso had ever seen, with debates that were passionate but respectful, heated but constructive. In Ouagadougou, a group of young entrepreneurs proposed a system of economic governance that would make foreign investment subject to community approval. In Gaoua, traditional chiefs and modern civil servants worked together to design a justice system that honored both customary law and international human rights standards. But it was in the capital, Ouagadougou, where the most innovative ideas emerged. A coalition of students, professors, and civil society activists proposed what they called radical transparency, a system where every government action would be recorded, documented, and made available to the public in real time. Corruption thrives in darkness, explained Dr. Mariam Sanin, a political science professor who had become one of the leading voices in the reform movement. If we make it impossible for officials to act in secret, we make it impossible for them to betray the public trust. President Traoré attended as many of these regional assemblies as possible, not as a leader promoting his agenda, but as a citizen participating in the democratic process. His presence energized the discussions, but more importantly, it demonstrated his genuine commitment to shared governance. At one assembly in Ouagadougou, a young woman challenged him directly. "Mr. President, how do we know that you won't use these reforms to consolidate your own power? How do we know that you're not just eliminating your competitors?" Traoré's response would be quoted extensively in the weeks that followed. "Sister, that is exactly the question you should be asking. A healthy democracy requires citizens who are skeptical of power, who demand accountability, who never stop questioning their leaders. The reforms we are discussing today should make it impossible for any president, including me, to betray your trust without immediate consequences." As the regional assemblies concluded and delegates prepared for the national convention, another significant development emerged from an unexpected source. Several of the arrested conspirators had begun cooperating with investigators, providing detailed information about the foreign network that had funded their activities. The revelations were staggering. The conspiracy had been just one part of a broader campaign targeting multiple African countries whose leaders had challenged foreign economic dominance. Similar operations were being run in Mali, Niger, and Ghana, with the ultimate goal of installing compliant governments that would reverse nationalization policies and anti-corruption initiatives. We were promised that if the operation succeeded, we would be rewarded with senior positions in the new government, confessed former Minister Ouagadougou during his interrogation. They told us that President Traoré's reforms were destroying our economy and that foreign investment would only return if he was removed. The confession revealed the psychological warfare that had been used to recruit the conspirators. They had been convinced that they were patriots saving their country from economic ruin, rather than traitors serving foreign interests. This revelation prompted President Traoré to expand the scope of the investigation beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Working with intelligence services from friendly nations, investigators began mapping the broader network of foreign interference across the region. The findings were shared with other African leaders, leading to a continental summit on sovereignty and self-determination held in Addis Ababa. President Traoré's address to the assembled heads of state was broadcast across Africa and became a rallying cry for a new generation of African leadership. My brothers and sisters, he said, standing before the flags of 54 nations, what happened in Burkina Faso is not unique to our country. We are all facing the same challenge: how to build genuine sovereignty in a world where foreign powers believe they have the right to determine our destiny. But I bring you good news from our struggle. When we chose truth over convenience, when we chose transparency over corruption, when we chose the voice of our people over the whispers of foreign agents, we discovered something remarkable. Our people are stronger, wiser, and more committed to freedom than our enemies had calculated. The speech received multiple standing ovations and led to the formation of the African Sovereignty Alliance, a coalition of nations committed to supporting each other against foreign interference and to sharing best practices for transparent governance. Back in Ouagadougou, the National Constitutional Convention was approaching its climax. Over 3 months of deliberation, the delegates had crafted a remarkable document that balanced traditional African governance principles with modern democratic institutions. The new constitution included revolutionary provisions for citizen oversight, mandatory transparency in all government operations, and mechanisms for rapid removal of officials who betrayed the public trust. It also included strong protections for national sovereignty, making it illegal for government officials to accept funding or direction from foreign sources. But perhaps most importantly, it established what delegates called the people's veto, a mechanism that would allow citizens to directly overturn any government decision through a petition process that required support from just 5% of registered voters. We have created a system where the government serves at the pleasure of the people, not the other way around, explained Delegate Fatou Cissé, a farmer from a small village who had emerged as one of the convention's most influential voices. Never again will our leaders be able to betray us without immediate consequences. The constitutional referendum was scheduled for 6 months after the convention concluded, giving citizens time to study the document and participate in public debates about its provisions. But early polling suggested overwhelming support, with approval ratings exceeding 80% in most regions. As President Traoré prepared for what would be his final major address before the referendum, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought his country to this moment. The assassination attempt that had seemed like a moment of ultimate crisis had instead become the catalyst for the most comprehensive democratic renewal in Burkina Faso's history. Standing in his study, looking out over a city that seemed to buzz with new energy and hope, he thought of his father's words about leadership being tested in moments of crisis. The test had come, and while the scars remained, the outcome had exceeded his most optimistic expectations. Tomorrow, he would address the nation one final time before they voted on their new constitution. But tonight, he was simply a man who had kept faith with his people, even when some of those closest to him had lost faith with their country. The morning of the constitutional referendum dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of blooming flame trees across Ouagadougou. President Ibrahim Traoré rose before sunrise, as had become his custom since the assassination attempt 8 months earlier. The events that had followed that traumatic morning had transformed not just his presidency, but the very soul of Burkina Faso. As he prepared for what he knew would be a historic day, Traoré reflected on the remarkable journey his country had taken. The 12 conspirators were now serving sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years in prison, their confessions having provided a detailed map of foreign interference networks that stretched across the continent. The foreign agents who had coordinated the conspiracy had been expelled, and several countries had been forced to recall their ambassadors and formally apologize for their interference. But more importantly, the crisis had awakened something in the Burkinabe people that had been dormant for too long, a fierce pride in their sovereignty and an unwavering commitment to transparent governance. The constitutional referendum was expected to pass by a wide margin, but Traoré had insisted on campaigning for it as if the outcome were uncertain. Over the past month, he had visited every region of the country, not as a president promoting his agenda, but as a citizen advocating for reforms that he genuinely believed would outlast his own time in office. At 6 a.m., he joined the long line of voters at a polling station in his childhood neighborhood. As he waited his turn, chatting casually with farmers, teachers, and shop owners, international observers marveled at the scene. This was not the orchestrated photo opportunity that characterized elections in many countries. It was a genuine demonstration of democratic participation. "Mr. President," called out Mamadou Ouagadougou, an elderly man who had taught in the local primary school for 40 years. "Are you nervous about the vote?" Traoré smiled warmly. "Teacher Ouagadougou, I'm not nervous about the vote. I'm excited about what comes after it." When his turn came, Traoré marked his ballot with the same careful consideration he had shown for every decision of his presidency. The ballot was simple. Do you approve the new constitution as proposed by the National Constitutional Convention? Below were two boxes, oui and non. He marked oui with a firm hand, folded the ballot, and placed it in the transparent box that would be monitored by representatives from every political party, civil society organization, and international observer mission. As he emerged from the polling station, hundreds of journalists waited to capture his statement. But instead of the typical political rhetoric, Traoré offered something more personal. "Today, we are not just voting on a constitution," he said, speaking directly to the cameras that would carry his words across Africa and beyond. "We are voting on whether we believe that ordinary people have the wisdom to govern themselves. We are voting on whether transparency is more powerful than corruption. We are voting on whether truth is stronger than conspiracy. 8 months ago, enemies of our democracy tried to silence our voice with bullets. Today, we answer them with ballots. And I believe our answer will echo across this continent and inspire people everywhere who refuse to accept that their destiny should be determined by others." The voting proceeded smoothly throughout the day, with turnout exceeding 85%, one of the highest in African history. In remote villages accessible only by dirt roads, people walked for hours to reach polling stations. In cities, lines stretched for blocks as citizens patiently waited their turn to participate in what many saw as the most important vote of their lives. International observers were astonished by the atmosphere surrounding the referendum. Instead of the tension that usually defines elections, polling stations looked more like festivals. Traditional musicians played between ballots, food vendors served steaming plates to waiting crowds, and children laughed and played nearby as their parents cast their votes. Dr. Amina Hassan, an election observer with the Carter Center, turned to her colleagues in awe. "In 30 years of monitoring elections across 4 continents, I have never seen anything like this. The people here aren't just voting, they're celebrating their democracy." As night fell and polls closed, counting began under the watchful gaze of thousands of observers. Every step of the tabulation was broadcast live on television and radio, with cameras capturing the process in full view of the nation. By 8 p.m., results began trickling in, and the direction was unmistakable. Constituency after constituency showed overwhelming support for the new constitution, numbers that surpassed even the boldest predictions. By 10 p.m., with 60% of ballots counted, the outcome was already beyond doubt. The Constitution was passing with more than 87% approval. It was a mandate as humbling as it was decisive. In the presidential palace, Captain Ibrahim Traoré watched alongside advisors and civil society leaders who had walked with him through the nation's turbulent transformation. When the final tally was announced, 87.3% approval with 86.4% turnout, the room erupted in applause and tears. Traoré, however, remained calm and reflective. "This is not a victory for any man or any party," he said softly. "This is a victory for the belief that people can govern themselves if only given the chance." At 11 p.m., he addressed the nation from the same podium where, 8 months earlier, he had exposed a conspiracy against Burkina Faso. This time, his words carried hope instead of warning. "My fellow citizens," he began, "today you have written a new chapter in our nation's history. With your votes, you declared that Burkina Faso belongs to its people, that government serves only at your will, and that our future will be determined by our own choices, not the schemes of others. The Constitution you have approved today will make us stronger, more transparent, and more accountable. But remember, documents alone do not create democracy. People do. And today, you have proven that you are ready for the responsibilities and privileges of true self-rule." He looked directly into the camera, his voice steady with gratitude. "To those who tried to silence our democracy with violence, we say you have failed. To those who conspired against our sovereignty, we say you are defeated. And to those around the world who doubted Africans' readiness for real democracy, we say, watch and learn." The speech spread like wildfire. Across Africa, across the world, clips of the celebration flooded social media under the hashtag #OsBurkina model. International coverage hailed the moment as a turning point, but the most powerful reactions came from African leaders themselves. Traoré's phone rang constantly with calls from heads of state asking how to bring such reforms to their own nations. "Ibrahim," said Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo, "what you've achieved is remarkable. But tell me, how can we do this without first enduring something as brutal as an assassination attempt?" Traoré's reply carried the weight of lived truth. "Kwame, the bullets didn't create our democracy, they revealed it. The strength was always in our people. The crisis only gave them permission to claim it. You don't need a conspiracy to awaken the spirit of democracy. You just need to trust your people with the truth." In the weeks that followed, delegations from around the world descended on Ouagadougou to study the so-called Burkina model. Scholars, journalists, and political leaders sought to understand how a nation had turned a near tragedy into a blueprint for democratic renewal. 6 months later, on the first anniversary of the assassination attempt, the new constitution officially took effect. At the site where shots had once been fired, now transformed into a memorial garden dedicated to truth, transparency, and democratic renewal, Traoré led a simple ceremony. Families filled the grounds, children played, and international visitors walked through the gardens that symbolized rebirth. "A year ago," Traoré told the small crowd, "someone tried to kill our democracy. Today, it stands stronger than ever. That is the power of truth. It cannot be destroyed, only delayed." Beside him stood his wife, Aminata, and their children. 7-year-old Mariam, often seen at public events as a symbol of innocence and hope, tugged at her father's arm and whispered a question picked up by the microphones. "Papa, are the bad men who tried to hurt you still angry?" Traoré knelt, meeting her eyes. "Yes, some of them are still angry. But they can't hurt us anymore. Everyone knows who they are, and the people are awake and watching." "Will they try again?" she asked. "Maybe," he said gently. "But if they do, they'll discover we are stronger than before." The exchange moved the nation. It captured the essence of Burkina Faso's transformation, from a place resigned to corruption and foreign interference to a country newly alive with confidence and vigilance. Later that evening, Traoré found a letter on his desk from Salamata Ouattara, the schoolteacher who had helped lead the Constitutional Convention. "Mr. President," it read, "a year ago, you survived bullets aimed at your body. Today, you have survived something even more dangerous, the temptation to use crisis for personal power. Instead, you chose to share power with the people. That choice makes you not just a survivor, but a statesman. History will not remember you as the president who was shot. but as the president who trusted his people with their own destiny. Her words cut deep. He knew they were true. The attempt on his life had been designed to end his presidency, to halt reform. Instead, it had ignited the most sweeping democratic transformation modern Africa had seen. Across the continent, nations were beginning to adapt the Burkina model, embracing radical transparency, citizen oversight, and real accountability. And in doing so, they were proving something the world had long doubted, not only that African democracy was possible, but that it could surpass the standards set by older powers in the West. That night, gazing over the lights of Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré remembered his father's words. Leadership is tested in crisis. His test had come with bullets. His answer had come with truth, courage, and faith in ordinary people, and that answer had changed a nation forever. The scars remained, on his country, on his government, and on his own heart. But those scars had become symbols of resilience rather than reminders of trauma. They told the story of a democracy that had faced its darkest hour and emerged stronger, more transparent and more accountable than ever before. As he prepared for bed, Traoré offered the same prayer he had whispered every night since the assassination attempt. Give us the strength to remain worthy of the trust our people have placed in us and the wisdom to remember that our power comes from service, not domination. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as every day did in the life of a president. But tonight, Ibrahim Traoré could rest knowing that his country had not just survived its greatest test. It had transformed that test into its greatest triumph. The reckoning was complete. The new dawn had begun. 5 years after the constitutional referendum, Burkina Faso had become a beacon of democratic governance across Africa. President Ibrahim Traoré, now serving his second and final term under the new constitutional limits, could look back on a transformation that had exceeded even his most optimistic expectations. The Burkina model had been adopted in various forms by 17 African countries, leading to what scholars called the African Democratic Renaissance. The principles of radical transparency, citizen oversight, and rapid accountability had proven adaptable to different cultural and political contexts, while maintaining their core commitment to genuine self-governance. The 12 conspirators had completed their prison sentences and had been released to a country that had moved far beyond their vision of foreign-dominated governance. Some had sought refuge abroad, others had returned to quiet lives in their home communities, their names forever associated with a failed attempt to subvert democracy. The foreign intelligence networks that had funded the conspiracy had been largely dismantled, their operations exposed through a continent-wide investigation that had led to new international protocols for combating external interference in African affairs. But perhaps the most significant legacy of those tumultuous months was visible in the everyday life of Burkina Faso's citizens. Children who had been in primary school during the constitutional crisis were now young adults who had never known a government that operated in secrecy or accepted corruption as inevitable. Mariam Traoré, the president's daughter who had asked such pointed questions during the memorial ceremony, was now 12 years old and already showing signs of the political awareness that characterized her generation. During a recent visit to her father's office, she had studied the memorial wall where photographs of the arrested conspirators served as reminders of the price of betrayal. "Papa," she had asked, "do you ever regret that it happened?" President Traoré had considered the question carefully before answering. "Mariam, I regret that people were hurt. I regret that some of our leaders chose betrayal over service. I regret the pain it caused our nation. But do I regret the changes it made possible? Never. Because now everyone knows that democracy works? Because now everyone knows that we can make it work." As President Traoré prepared to leave office, the new constitution's term limits ensuring a peaceful transition of power, he reflected on the unexpected paths that leadership could take. He had never imagined that his presidency would be defined by an assassination attempt, but he had learned that greatness often emerges not from the challenges we seek, but from how we respond to the challenges that seek us. The final line of his memoir, published after leaving office, captured the essence of what he had learned. They fired at our democracy, but succeeded only in making it bulletproof.